I'm going to talk to you tonight
Look,
about
come here.
Oh, no, I don't.
Come here. Look.
So can everybody mute themselves, please? That would be really nice if we could just be on mute. Great. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Okay. And so what you're looking at here is a map of South Arabia that was drawn in 1932. So where I'm sitting right now is at kind of 2 o'clock on that map. If you look, if you follow the coastline around, see a place called Muscat. So that's where I'm sitting right now whilst I'm talking to you. And I'm gonna talk you through a journey that I did a couple of years ago, following the red line that runs from north to south along that map and connects Doha, the capital of Qatar, to Salalah, which is the second largest city in Oman. And that line crosses the biggest sand desert on earth, which is called the Empty Quarter in Europe, and in the Arab world, it's called the Rub al Khali. But a little bit about me. Judy asked me to tell you a little bit about my background. So I grew up in a place not dissimilar to the Yorkshire Dales, really, in terms of landscapes. This is Shropshire, where I grew up. So I'm a Shropshire lad, really, just close to the Welsh border, and had a very, very rural background in childhood. So when I would get off the bus from school, all that there was to be done, because our house was absolutely in the middle of nowhere, is to put your wellies on and clear off with your fishing rod and my dog. And so I spent a lot of time in the countryside, and actually, ironically, Judy, just like your son, at the age of 17, I applied to join a little charity called British Schools Exploring Society, and I went with them to North Norway on a 6-week expedition, which at the age of 17 was a real eye-opener for me. Sharing a small tent with 2 people I'd never met in my life, and 6 weeks of constant daylight, living on a glacier and doing some scientific research. It was just fantastic, and it just opened up a whole world of exploration for me that is like Bilbo Baggins stepping out of the Shire, really. I didn't realize there was a world outside of Shropshire, but all of a sudden I did. And so then I started sea kayaking, and I volunteered for Outward Bound in Scotland at Lochiel, and found myself kayaking up and down the west coast of Scotland. And eventually, about 10 years ago, more than 20 years ago, I kayaked around Oman, which was 1,700 kilometers, which was quite a fantastic journey from Iran to Yemen, around the coastline of Oman, a beautiful coastline. And then I got the bug for Arctic travel. And so myself and my friend, who's a detective in Cumbria, we skied across Greenland using parachutes to follow Nansen's first crossing of Greenland. Got the travel bug there, went up to the Northwest Passage, and all of these expeditions we were organizing ourselves and funding through charitable grants and raising money, that and the other. And then I felt it was time to give back, so I started leading expeditions for youth organizations. This photograph, what you're looking at in this photograph is not the sun, it's the moon. You can see the stars, you can see Orion, the 3 stars of Orion, just above the skyline to the right. And this was my home for a year. So this was the Arctic Year project I led in 2001. So I took 2 groups of young people north to Svalbard. We overwintered. So we sailed up in the summer. This was our base camp. There was no snow when we arrived. Darkness appeared in November, total darkness. So we didn't see the sun until the following February, a bit like Yorkshire, I suspect. Temperatures dropped to minus 35 degrees. We were probably some of the last people on the planet to see images of 9/11. I remember a helicopter from the Norwegian governor dropped us a mailbag off in November, and someone sent through photographs of what had happened in the States. So that was another, another great expedition. But really, for the last 20 years, I've been driving an old Land Rover around the deserts of Arabia, and it's a part of the world that I've really fallen in love with. It suits my lifestyle perfectly. It's wonderful for those of you who have a curiosity to explore, because you can go absolutely anywhere you want to in Arabia and camp anywhere you want to, unlike I have a house just outside of Inverness, and every little place you can possibly pull your car off the road has a sign which says no parking. Whereas here in Arabia, you can virtually go wherever you want to go. So this desert in the photograph here is 2 hours from my front door, and it's just beautiful. I take the dogs out there almost every weekend to go camping and walking. So I've been in Oman now for 17 years. I run Outward Bound, which is a youth development charity out here, and so my day job is training young people and giving them the skills, future skills to prepare them for jobs that don't yet exist, which is always great fun and keeps us on our toes. So that's a little bit about me. My story on the trail of, so I've done lots of expeditions in the past, all of them building up to getting bigger and bigger, really. And I've got, my next expedition is starting in 2022. So currently in the planning phase of that, and a senior member of UK royalty has just agreed to be the patron of that, which is good. But this journey I'm going to tell you about starts in a graveyard, where all good expeditions do. It's like the expeditions are either planned in a pub on a beer mat, or they start in a graveyard. And this graveyard is outside Bristol. It's a little village called Pill, just off the motorway, Gordano services, when you come over the bridge over the River Avon. Just behind the service station, a humble little village called Pill. And in the graveyard of St. George's Church is the headstone of an explorer whose exploits were overshadowed by those who followed. And this is his very humble gravestone. And, you know, because it's Bristol, I'm sure people don't do this kind of thing in Yorkshire, but because it's Bristol, most of the lead has been stolen out of the headstone there and melted down. And it's in proud and loving memory of Bertram Sidney Thomas, OBE, Arabian explorer who passed into higher life, age 28, 2 years after Christmas Day in 1950. And a very humble gravestone, but actually, you know, it captures the highlights of a life well lived. You know, when Thomas was at his peak of desert travel, which was 1930-31, the world of exploration was very, very vibrant, really. The South Pole had been conquered. You know, we all probably remember this photograph of Scott and his men at the South Pole, having discovered the Norwegian flag flying there, and the defeat and all these fantastic men dying on the way back. North Pole was being squabbled over. Peary and Cook were fighting over the pole, and whether any of them got there was disputed by Wally Herbert. Everest had not been conquered, but maybe it had. Mallory and Irvine, seen through the clouds high up there, were they on the way down having conquered it, or were they on the way up? We'll never know. But certainly Everest was being nibbled away at. So with the South Pole gone, the North Pole claims to be gone, Everest being nibbled away at, the focus was very much on last great areas to conquer, if that's the right word. And the focus was very much at the time on Arabia, made more romantic by the exploits of the man on the left, as you're looking at, who's T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. And if you want to join a great club for exploration, you can either join the Royal Geographical Society in London, or you can join the Explorers Club in New York. And the man on the right, as you're looking, every year the Explorers Club have a great gathering, a great dinner, and it's called the Lowell Thomas Awards Dinner. And the man on the right is the kind of Kate Adie of his time, a bit of a swashbuckling journalist who stuck his nose where other people dare not. And he came back with the first black and white moving images of Lawrence of Arabia blowing up the trains in Arabia. And these fantastic films captured the world's attention. They played from Madison Square Garden in New York to Covent Garden to Hong Kong to millions of people. So people were increasingly intrigued by this place called the Empty Quarter. And so in 1930, the Explorers Club in New York claimed that it really did act as the final challenge, the greatest expanse of unexplored territory outside of Antarctica. And so the race was on to become the first person to cross this great sand desert. And unsurprisingly, it was a group of eccentric British people who were in the race to cross. And if you go to a bookshop in the UK and ask for a book on desert exploration, you'll probably find a book written by the man in the middle here, Wilfrid Sessiger, who's considered by many to be the guru of desert travel, but actually Thesiger had it relatively easy in that he was 15 years later after the first ever crossing. So it's always easier to go second and to learn from other people's experiences. But without doubt, Thesiger was a great photographer, a gifted writer, and his book Arabian Sands is a travel classic. So Thesiger was not the first to cross. There were two people in the race, one of whom, if I say the name Philby, you'll probably think of his son, Kim Philby, the Cambridge spy ring, probably the most notorious double agent Britain has ever had for 30, 40 years, from almost the highest office in British secret intelligence, operating out of London and Washington, but for all that time sending information back to Moscow, to Russia. But this isn't Kim, this is his father, Harry St John Philby. And he had a great passion. This photograph's taken in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. And St John Philby had the desire to become the first European to cross the greatest desert on earth, the largest desert on earth. But he made a big mistake, which explorers should never do, which was that he asked for permission. And if you ask for permission, the danger is that someone might say no. And sadly, the king, who he was advising, said, just wait one more winter. And unbeknown to Philby, several hundred kilometers to the south in Muscat, where I'm sitting right now, our man at the grave, Bertram Thomas, was planning in secret his own attempt on crossing the empty quarter. And you might struggle to see Bertram Thomas in the next photograph. One of his great attributes was that he was able to blend in with the local people pretty well. You can see him, you can just about spot him there. This is the Omani government in the late 1920s. So that's Bertram wearing his hat, and he was sent there from Iraq, from Mesopotamia, to help the Sultan of Oman get his finances under control. And he wasn't very good at his job. The Sultan's finances didn't improve whilst Bertram was there, but Bertram had a very good time exploring, which was it's clear looking back that he went there with a plan in his mind, but he kept it secret. He didn't do what Philby did and ask for permission. He just kept his cards close to his chest and planned his own trip. So this is him with a bunch of Omani tribal people. You know, a very clearly very, very, very well spoken Arabic, and was able to persuade people to follow him on his journeys, often into places that were unmapped. But people would dare go no further than their tribal boundary, which was often just an invisible area on a map. They would not step beyond this invisible boundary. So wherever he went, he was always having to renegotiate with new tribes and renegotiate fresh camels. So he became a great master of traveling by relay, really. And that was ooh, can you still see that screen? Great. So if we go back to the first map, the thick red line going from north to south is the journey that he did in 1930-31. But building up to that, you can see two other dashed red lines on the map, one going along the north coast and one going along the southeast coast. And both of these journeys, it's quite clear looking back now, were just training journeys to build him up for the big one to cross. So it was he, when he did cross, it took him 57 days. Was he the first person to cross the biggest sand desert on earth? We'll never know, of course, because in Arabia, people didn't really and still don't write things down very much. History is shared. History is a spoken history. And so it may well be that that the desert was crossed. And in particular, were it crossed, it would have been crossed by camels carrying something that grows in southern Oman that at one time had a value greater than oil or gold, and it's still with us today. I can go and buy a bag of this stuff, but now it's very cheap. In the past, it was incredibly expensive, and it's called frankincense, and it's the sap of a tree in southern Oman. And at a time, the great markets of Rome and Alexandria and Damascus, hundreds and hundreds of camel trains were setting off across Arabia carrying this wonderful incense. And it's highly likely that they did cross the empty quarter in winter when the weather was good or better. But even so, it was always a journey of great danger. And we can't be sure, but what we do know is that Thomas was the first recorded crossing. And he carried with him a camera. If you can imagine how cameras have changed in size in our lives, imagine what a camera was like in 1931 and strapped to the side of a camel bouncing around. So these are some of Thomas's photographs that he took. They're stored at the Royal Geographical Society in London. So these are the Jibali people, the mountain people, and he's holding up frankincense. So he's burning frankincense there. That's the white smoke coming out of what he's holding in his hand. And that's to get rid of the evil spirits. The English word genie has its root in the Arabic word jinn. So this man is burning the frankincense to get rid of the evil spirits from his cattle, so his cattle will be healthy. And in southern Oman, we have lots of cattle because that part of Arabia is touched by the monsoon, but it doesn't penetrate very far inland. And so before long, Thomas found himself having to rely on his Bedouin guides to go from waterhole to waterhole. And at the time, all these waterholes and wells were kept open. It was the only way of survival for the people who inhabited the sands. So your approach to a waterhole, bearing in mind it was an incredibly tribal society at the time, was one of great danger. It was essential. You had to water your camels. Camels need to be watered almost every day, really. But to feed those 6 or 7 animals you're looking at with a leaky old goat skin would take you half a day. It doesn't matter how much you're trying to rush to get away in case someone's waiting for you over the dunes. You have to water your camels. And of course, the tribes in the local area will know that any travelers have to come to this waterhole. So they'll be staked out and ready for you. So the top tip number 1 for potential desert travelers tonight is to fill in the well when you've finished, and that slows down anyone pursuing you. They've got to dig it out before they can get on your trail again. Further north, Thomas found himself in enormous mountains of sand, the sand dunes that went on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles until they reached Doha. This is the capital of Qatar. This is where the World Cup will be in a few years' time. Believe it or not, this is what it looked like in 1931 in February when Thomas arrived 57 days after setting off. And an incredible achievement, and news of his story made the front page of every newspaper around the world. The New York Times, Times in London, Sydney Herald, Yorkshire Argus, probably, with front page news absolutely everywhere. And the first place that Thomas went to speak when he'd finished his journey was this building here, the Royal Geographical Society, just up the road from the Albert Hall in London, overlooking Hyde Park. And if you go in through the arched doorway, you can see that's lit up there, you'll find Thomas's name in gold lettering, because he was awarded the highest medal that the society can award. He did write a book. The book's called Arabia Felix. It's a bit heavy duty. It's very scientific and lots of lists of plants and animals that he collected. And he was a great scientist, very committed scientist, even in such challenging environments. You can find this book in a second-hand bookshop for about 20 or 30 quid. Arabia Felix. It's a lovely read, and Lawrence himself wrote the foreword. And you can see under Thomas's name at the top there that he was given medal after medal after medal, from UK to the States to Asia. In researching the expedition, so it took about 2 or 3 years to research the expedition, and I get as much enjoyment doing all the preparation as I do the journey itself, because you really do feel that you get to know the person, and often I'm able to track down his surviving family or the surviving family members, and that was no different to Thomas, really. So Thomas, I just discovered his great granddaughter was still alive in southern Scotland, lives in Muffet. And we also discovered that his wife, when he passed away, had clearly had enough of all of his exploring, and threw all of his things into a box and donated them to Cambridge University, where he'd studied. And when you go and rummage around in that box, no, really the signing in book, in 5 years, 2 people had researched Thomas. He really was that forgotten explorer. But what we did discover, or someone discovered before me really, was that he also carried a cine camera on that journey in 1930 and 31. So what I'm going to play you now is some of the earliest moving footage of southern Arabia shot by Thomas. Unsurprisingly, the cine camera, which must have been very fragile, unsurprisingly, it broke halfway along his journey, and obviously it's silent, but at least it'll give you an idea. I'll keep whipping on because I know we've already got a certain amount of time. So when I read Thomas's notes and superimposed his journey onto a modern day map of Arabia, again you can see Muscat where I'm sitting right now at 2 o'clock up there. The white line now on this map is his route that he took in 1930-31, and the difference between this map and the map I showed you earlier is that there are now political borders in place, and that's the reason why this journey hadn't been done for 85 years since Thomas did it, because no one could get permission to cross from Oman into Saudi Arabia at a place where there's actually nobody. It's in the middle of the desert. There's nobody there. There's no checkpoints. There's no customs. So it's just a place that no one is allowed to go. And so if we were going to be able to recreate this journey, we had to get quite senior approval to unlock that door, to unlock that border. And the people who were key to that for us, really, on the left, obviously, we all know Prince Charles, who's a great fan of Arabia. And on the right, Sultan Qaboos, the Sultan of Oman, who sadly passed away just over a year ago. So they were very, very supportive of this journey. And we had the King of Saudi Arabia and the Emir of Qatar also joined hands. So we had a pretty powerful deck of cards there that unlocked really that border. But what we did want was a bit of paper just to carry with us to say that who we were and what we do, because whilst it's lovely to look at Prince Charles and the Sultan here, your average border guard who's armed with a machine gun in the middle of the desert isn't necessarily going to believe you when you say you're here on His Majesty's business. So we needed a bit of paper to carry with us. So we're pretty certain that we got permission. So the next job for me is to build my team, and I wanted that team to be very small so that we could move very quickly. Mohammed, one of my instructors at Outward Bound there in the middle, fantastic lad, super fit, a very avid reader. He'd read Arabian Sands. He speaks perfect English and obviously Arabic. So Mohammed was the first member of the team. Amr al-Wahabi here, who's a Bedouin. He's born in the sand, lives in the sand, a critical member of the team, doesn't speak any English. But Amr is critical because he knows where to find first and reverse gear in a camel, and so his skills are going to be fairly critical in getting us across those sands. It was apparent in doing all the preparation that the water holes that once existed, that Thomas depended on, have now been long abandoned. The empty quarter is emptier than it's ever been today, because all of the Bedou who inhabited the central sands have moved to the edge where there's this wonderful thing called electricity. And with electricity comes this even better thing called air conditioning. So why on earth would you endure 52 degrees of heat in the desert when you can live on the edge, have piped water, and have electricity and air conditioning? So the water holes have been abandoned. Most of them are full. None of them are marked on a map, or very few of them are marked on a map accurately. So it's almost impossible to find anyway. So from the outset, we had 2 support vehicles, but those vehicles still couldn't carry all the water we needed. If you think, you know, when you go for a walk in the Dales or wherever, you know, 1 liter of water is 1 kg, and a camel will drink 20 liters of water in one drink. So that's 20 kg, and we're going to be out there for 50 days. So do your maths. 50 days times 20 kg times 4 camels times 5 people, plus the fuel for the vehicles, plus food. So there's no way could the vehicles literally carry everything that we needed to carry. So we had to find water. It was absolutely critical. So John and Sim, left and right, New Zealand and UK's top landscape photographers. So they both very comfortable driving in the sand, living in the sand. I'd done expeditions with them before. Great people. So my plan was to replicate this journey, to follow in Thomas's footsteps, and I met his daughter in Muffet, and after we'd met, she obviously learned that these beautiful medals that she'd had stuffed under the wardrobe might be worth something. And a friend in Edinburgh pointed out to me that they'd recently been put up for auction, and I contacted the auctioneers in Edinburgh. They informed me that the medals had been bought and they had remained in Britain, but they couldn't tell me, obviously with data protection, who had got them. But interestingly, about a week before we set off, I had a very curious phone call here in Muscat. Would I like to meet someone who had something I might like to see? And when you look at these medals there and look at this, these are the same medals. So they were bought by a man here in Muscat through a buyer in the UK. And so these are those same medals that Thomas was bestowed. So top left, you can see David Livingston with his cap on. That's the Livingston Medal, awarded by the Royal Scottish Geographical Society. And so here we are. When Thomas set off in 1930, there was none of this nonsense. We had BBC World Service, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, The Telegraph, and the man who is now the Sultan on the right, who was then the Minister of Culture and Heritage, Said Haitham bin Tariq. So he was there to wave us off. And off we set. So if you were in Salalah that day, apologies for the traffic jam. We were going as quickly as we could. But these camels were not our camels. These camels were just for the TV cameras. These are kind of show camels, really. As soon as we got around the corner, we handed them back to our Bedouin friends. And we started walking our own camels. If you look in the background at the end of the street, you can see a low range of hills in the background there. And those hills go up to about 5,000 feet in altitude. And over those hills, 200 kilometers to the north, are our camels. And they are undergoing camel boot camp. Because one of the issues we have, probably the greatest risk of this journey failing, is that camels like us have gone soft over the decades, and they've gone from being the very hardy animals you saw in that black and white footage with enormous loads of 60 kg put on their backs, to today they're soft. They don't need to walk anywhere to get grazing because fodder is brought to them, water is brought to them. They spend most of their time in little corrals. So, you know, your average camel today is not capable of doing anything like the camels you saw in 1930. So our 4 camels are being toughened up 200 kilometers north, and that involves tying them behind a Toyota pickup. And the Toyota pickup will trot. They'll trot behind the pickup for about 10 kilometers, next day 15 kilometers, then they'll have a rest, and then the next day 15, and the next day 20. So hopefully by the time we get there, they'll be lean and mean, as we were after a few days walking. So we were walking out of Salalah, and it was just lovely to get into a sleeping bag. So we slept on the ground every night. We didn't sleep in tents. And if any of you have ever slept in the desert, you will understand completely why you don't want to spend a night in a tent, because when that sun goes down and those stars come out every night, it is absolutely fantastic. So a very simple way of traveling for the first few days anyway, up and over those 5,000-foot mountains. You can see the grass is brown here. It might not look too highly densely vegetated to you, but for Arabia, this is quite tropical, really. And in September and October, these hills are vivid green because the monsoon rains have stopped, the clouds have parted, the sun comes out, and all of what you see here would be as green as Yorkshire or Somerset. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's a little part of Africa and Arabia. So we have leopards here, we have weaver birds, the yellow weaver birds that swing under the acacia trees. It's absolutely beautiful, but it doesn't penetrate very far inland. And before you know it, you're in a kind of a Star Wars kind of lunar landscape. And the only way through the mountains is to follow dry riverbeds. And I bet you don't have too many of those in Yorkshire, but this is a wadi bed. You're looking at limestone here, and the joy of limestone is that you have caves, and so in a lot of these caves we would find some pretty ancient rock art and script. And with the joy of social media that, of course, Thomas didn't have in 1930, we were able to put this photograph onto social media, and within a day, someone in France had interpreted this and told us this was graffiti left by frankincense collectors who were sheltering from the rain. So, but it was about 4,000 years old, which is quite interesting. So this was us. This was the way we slept every night. We'd try and gather a bit of wood. We'd have beautiful Arabic coffee. We carried flour and salt and water, and we baked bread and cooked the bread on the sand. We had honey, we had dates, and we had enough food, we thought, for 49 days stowed into these two vehicles. But actually, we barely had to touch much of it for the first 2 weeks. Very soon after those rocky valleys, those dry river valleys, the landscape opens up to sand. And the difference between rock and sand is that on sand, you can see what you're sharing the landscape with, because you can see prints. And when you look at the size of this print compared to Muhammad's hand, it's quite a large animal. And what was intriguing us was the difference in size between the front and the rear paw print in the gravel and the sand there. And again, I was out to, I don't know what you were doing last night, but I was out capturing bats here in Muscat last night with a local ecologist, and so Andrew interpreted this for me. He's an ecologist here in Oman, and so what we were on the trail of here was one of these beautiful animals, a striped hyena. And the striped hyenas are doing really well in southern Arabia, as are the wolves. We have Arabian wolves, so they're all doing pretty well, which is great to hear. I said we didn't really need to touch our own food, and that's really because, despite being in an incredibly remote part of Arabia, where for several days at a time we wouldn't see a single house, we would always be found by large groups of people who would be out looking for us, because, you know, in this part of the world, news travels faster, but it doesn't travel via social media. It travels by gunshot. And so often towards the end of a day, we would be looking for a campsite, quite weary, having walked for 8 hours, and really looking forward to an early night in our sleeping bags. But then you'd hear a gunshot, and that would be the sign that we'd been spotted by someone who'd be standing on the roof of his four-wheel drive. He'd let off a shot, and that would be the signal to everybody else that he'd found us, and everyone would gather around him, and then down they would come into the valley, and another goat or sheep would be slaughtered. And I think by the time we'd reached the border with Saudi Arabia, after 12 days, we consumed about 27 different animals. I think about 13 or 14 goats, a dozen sheep, and a few camels had been slaughtered in our honor. So a desert journey is not one to be undertaken by a vegetarian, really, because you won't stand much chance of surviving out there. Wonderful gatherings, sometimes in a tent, sometimes under the shade of a tree. So trees are very important in the Arab world. You know, they are places of protection from your greatest enemy, which is the sun. And so some of the gatherings like this one, this is at Shisser. We were talking about Ranal finds coming out to Oman. This is where Ran did a bit of an archaeological dig. There's a very famous city here on the southern edge of the sands that was a great trading point. So this was a social gathering for us. Poetry would be read, and singing and dancing. The most extraordinary array of firearms would be proudly presented. And this old man next to me, he's blind. Next to him with the blue headdress is his son, his young son. And what his son is holding in his hand is a black and white photograph of Dad next to me as a young man with black oily hair with Wilfrid Sessiger in 1946. So it was lovely to see these connections to the old explorers. But no one had heard of Thomas. Everyone remembered Thesiger because he was within a lifetime. But Thomas, again, doesn't matter whether you're in Bristol or in southern Oman, completely forgotten, despite being headline news around the world. So the stars of the show, undoubtedly, you won't have seen too many ladies around yet, and that would be completely the opposite on an all-female trip, which I have done in the past, with me being the only token male. On trips like that, not a big one like this, but trips into the empty quarter, if they were all female, then it would be all female gatherings that would greet us in the communities. But our camels were all female, and these girls are absolutely great, but they've been toughened up. They're used to coming out at football stadiums as the halftime entertainment in front of 50,000 people, doing a song and dance routine, and then going back to their trailers with plenty of food. So this was the camel that was chosen for me. Her name was Helwa, which in English means the beautiful one, and I'm sure you will agree, a beautiful, beautiful animal. But poor Helwa, as always, there were two sides to every story. Poor Helwa was stuck with me, and so it was a bit of a difficult week for both of us, really. And this is where Amr in the middle really comes into his own, because he realized pretty quickly when he met me and saw Helwa and I that he was dealing with a special needs student. So he kept the instructions pretty simple, and his first instruction to me was never let go of the rope. Which made sense to me until I discovered that the rope was not as long as Helwa's legs. And so, the first thing you discover is that camels are incredibly in tune with their surroundings and anything that moves. There's not a lot that moves in the desert apart from sand, but anything that does move, a bird or a very distant vehicle, will really spook them. And so I was black and blue because camels' legs are almost triple jointed. And it doesn't matter how you try and dance out of the way, you'll get a wallop with a great big round pad hitting you where you don't want to be hit. So for the first week, it was a pretty interesting baptism of fire for both of us. But slowly, we got into a good routine. This was Christmas Day, and we had a phone call on the satellite phone from the BBC World Service Radio in London, asking us how we were celebrating Christmas Day on the southern edge of the biggest sand desert on Earth. And it was pretty much like every other day, really. A bit of dried goat meat left over from the night before, and that was hanging out to dry because we didn't throw it away. If we couldn't eat it all, we might need to chew on it like biltong, so we dried it and we carried it on the roof rack of the vehicles. So Christmas Day was spent eating dried camel meat, and then a couple of days after Christmas Day, we came across our first water hole, and this water hole had clearly been restored, probably by an oil company prospecting for oil out there. And there are a couple of things that photographs don't share with you. One is sound, and the other is smell. And however thirsty the camels were, they would not drink this water because as closer and closer we got, you could smell the sulfur and the rotten eggs, and they would not approach it at all. However, they did devour everything that was green around it. If I should have done it before and after, because it was stripped of all vegetation, apart from the vivid green stuff at the back towards the big dunes. You don't let them eat that. That's called haram. And haram will give camels instant diarrhea, and diarrhea is a serious issue in an environment where fluid retention is very important. And both Thesiger and Thomas mentioned this in their books, because when you're traveling in a big group like they were, Thomas had 40 camels. Imagine every one of those camels has diarrhea and they're flicking their tails from side to side. It became a pretty messy affair, riding in a group of camels, all of whom had diarrhea and flicking tails. And so they discovered that the way to resolve that was to tie your camel's tail to your saddle, and then your camel could do whatever it wanted to, and your traveling companions wouldn't get splattered. So we're now on our white line, just about to cross that border into Saudi Arabia that hasn't been crossed in 85 years. And the bad news for us is that we still haven't got written permission to cross. That bad news that had been growing in our minds for a couple of days as we approached the border was pretty soon dismissed, because there's a military camp, a small military camp. If you're a naughty boy in Oman in the military, you get sent to this military camp, because it's a pretty godforsaken place in the middle of nowhere, a couple of porta cabins. And we'd arranged for a supply of water and fuel to be left there by the military for us, so we could refill before we entered the big sands in Saudi. And the soldiers there told us not to worry, that the Saudis were waiting for us, and we were in by royal command of the king himself. And we said, well, how do you know? And they said, well, we eavesdrop on our radios to what the Saudi military are saying on the other side of the border, and they do the same to us. So you better get moving. So we crossed the border. This was the man that we'd met who gave us permission, the foreign minister. Sadly, he was the only one who knew of our trip, and he'd passed away recently. But thankfully, word had clearly got through, and we were able to cross this border. It wasn't the most high border in the world. This is the border between Oman and Saudi Arabia. There didn't seem to be much point in going through the gate, so we just walked around it. And waiting for us a few kilometers on was a fantastic welcome party by the Saudi Arabian Border Patrol. So the border is over 1,000 miles long, but it's like this, it's completely open. And they were slightly concerned for our safety, because this is one of the biggest drug smuggling routes in Arabia. And if you travel through Saudi, through the desert with drugs, then you realize that as you enter Saudi Arabia's policy for drug trafficking is death. So when you sign your visa form on the plane to land in Riyadh or Jeddah, it's quite clear in big red letters, death to drug traffickers. So anyone smuggling drugs through here will only do so at night. They'll do it wearing night vision goggles. They won't have their lights on. They'll be armed, heavily armed, to shoot their way out of any meeting with the Border Patrol. So it's almost impossible in such a vast area for the Border Patrol to actually physically see a vehicle that's traveling. So they look for tracks, and when they see fresh tracks, that's when the fun starts and the race begins. So the Border Patrol guys are pretty mean, and so we were told that the king was slightly concerned for our safety. He was sending a small security team from Riyadh to ensure that no harm came of us as we spent the next 30 days in Saudi Arabia. So we were asked not to go too much further that day, but certainly not to stop. There was no need for us to stop, and they would find us. And I said, well, how will they find us? And they said, well, that's what they're good at. You don't need to worry about that. And sure enough, about 3 or 4 in the morning, I remember lying in my sleeping bag, hearing the noise of engines and seeing the sand dunes around me light up. And then as the sun rose, our small security team revealed itself, and this was it. So we could have started a small war with this lot. There were 5 of these vehicles had 50 cal machine guns mounted on the back. 2 of them were full of goats and sheep for obvious reasons. Another was full of water. So this really wasn't what we wanted to do. We didn't want to follow a dozen vehicles across this beautiful desert. So we had to think on our feet. But poor Major Talal, who's middle and center of the parade there, his instructions came from the king. And Major Talal is Saudi Special Forces. His instructions were to make sure we got out of Saudi Arabia alive. And all he had to do was to report on our situation and our welfare every day. And so we came to an agreement that he and his men would do what needed to be done, but would keep out of sight as they did it. So it became a bit of a covert training exercise for them to observe us, but not to be seen by us. So in fact, the only time we really ever saw them was when you ran behind a sand dune for an unexpected call of nature, and you found a very embarrassed man in camouflage ducking out of the way in embarrassment. So off we went. Waiting for us was this young man, and what he's got in his hands is absolutely beautiful, because this is the khanjar the Omani dagger that crossed the desert with Thomas in 1930-31. So his great-grandfather is this little man here. On the left is Wilfrid Sessiger. When Thesiger came to do a similar journey in 46, he did what anyone sensible would do. He found this little man who went with Thomas. This was Thomas's guide. And so, of course, he knew how to organize expeditions, which is why Thesiger wanted to work with him. So you can see around his waist, Thesiger's wearing his own knife, and Sheikh Saleh is wearing his own, covered by his hands a little bit. But this is it, a beautiful, beautiful heirloom that's still in the family several generations later. So it was lovely to see that and feel connected to the original expedition. So this was us now in these beautiful, beautiful sands. And if any of you are photographers, then this is absolute paradise. There are no footprints. There's not a bit of plastic. There's not a plane going overhead. There's not a light in any direction. So zero light pollution. It's one of those magical places on planet Earth where there's still no human footprint. And beautiful landscapes. If these ridges of sand were rock and they were in the Alps, you would have rope lengths of people with head torches going up those knife edge ridges every morning to try and get to a peak. And all of these peaks that we're traveling through are unclimbed. Just utterly beautiful to be out there in such a beautiful landscape. We'd start to travel about 5 a.m. every morning. So just before sunrise, the call to prayer. So I'd hear Amr and Muhammad would be praying. That would be my signal that I got about 10 more minutes in the warmth of my sleeping bag before I had to wriggle out. And then we'd have our breakfast very quickly. We'd never ride the camels for the first hour because they were well rested at night and they'd be a little bit frisky. So we'd walk them until they got a bit tired, and then we'd jump on and start riding. The vehicle support team were having their own adventures. You know, the vehicles were dreadfully overloaded, way above their carrying weight. And there were times when they couldn't follow us exactly, so we wouldn't see them. So we had to carry blankets and dates and a satellite phone and water, at least for a day, in case we didn't connect with them at night. But they had their own story to tell. They had great adventures and they did a brilliant job. Not rolling one of these vehicles in this terrain is incredibly difficult. And your fuel consumption, you know, no air conditioning at all, because air conditioning increases your fuel consumption. And you know, we cannot carry enough fuel, we cannot carry enough water. We have to be really, really careful. So in 1931, Thomas described this landscape as an abode of death because it hadn't rained for a decade when they passed through. And according to the guide with Major Talal, when we spoke to them periodically, it hadn't rained here for 6 years when we passed through. So it's a pretty, you know, for the camels, it was pretty tough sometimes. So we did carry as much emergency bales of straw and hay on the roof rack as we possibly could, but we had to use that sparingly because we could only carry about a dozen. So water was very critical when we could find it. Often it was way, way underground. It's not just a matter of lowering a rope down a well. Sometimes you have to walk horizontally, then down, then horizontally, then down, and by the time you reappear at the top, you've barely got any water left in your bucket. And you've got several very unimpressed camels. This waterhole was a good one. We soon learned that the telltale sign, there are quite a few wild camels roaming the desert. And you know, the camels know where the water is. Sometimes they can get to it, sometimes they can't. And if you see a bit of metal at 45 degrees, then that's your sign that, that there is a well there, because this is obviously where you would lower the bucket down. And they're covered by tarpaulin. You can see there's a tarpaulin bottom right there. We've revealed the well, lowered the rope down the bucket, and you have to put a stone in the bucket to make it sink and fill with water. And this water was perfectly drinkable. So probably for the first time in 3 weeks, we were able to have a wash. The camels were able to drink their fill, but you can see we've got fleeces on, we've got gloves on. It's bitterly cold now. It's dropping to 0. Just before dawn, and up into the mid to high 20s in the day, so quite a high range of temperatures. Navigation was very easy. It's a northerly wind that dominates Arabia at this time of year, so sand accumulates on the south side of any obstacles like these haram bushes here. So our route is due north, so it was very easy to navigate. And in terms of snakes and scorpions, well, sleeping on the sand for 49 nights or 48 nights, didn't see a single scorpion, and that's typical of the winter. And this one single snake, this harmless sand boa, which was so cold it could barely move, was all that we saw. The only species of bird, if there are any ornithologists amongst you, the only species of bird that was really still evident in the heart of the biggest desert on Earth was this one. And what you're looking at there is a micro forest. It's a micro ecosystem. It's not big, it's a small bush, but in that bush there'll be insects and moths. Therefore you'll have geckos and lizards, and therefore it's worth dropping down out of the sky to check out to see if there's a meal to be had. And the bird that left the prints here is very important in Arab culture, amongst the Bedouin in particular. You have them in Yorkshire, and it's a bird called the raven. And you have a saying, I think, one for sorrow, two for joy. And in the Arab world, there's a saying called "Raven, seek thy brother." So Thesiger, once he traveled in southern Arabia, went to the marshes of Iraq, and there he met a man called Gavin Maxwell. If you've watched the film Ring of Bright Water with the otter in Scotland, that was Gavin Maxwell, who met Thesiger in the marshes of Iraq. And one of Maxwell's books was called "Raven, Seek Thy Brother," because if a Bedouin were to see one raven, that would be bad news. So one for sorrow. And he would sit down and cover his ears and cover his eyes and shout, "Raven, seek thy brother. Come back with two, because two for joy. Two ravens is good news. Your camels will be fertile and your plenty of milk," and all that kind of good news that goes around in the Arab world. So after a couple of weeks going through the big dunes, the desert opens up into a big flatter sand sea, and we're able to make progress in a northward line. Almost every step is in the right direction now. And Thomas described this as the northward dash. And so we really are now motoring. And when we'd ride the camels, you're traveling at a speed of about 6 kilometers an hour. And when you're on foot, you're traveling at about 4 kilometers an hour. So you can do much greater distances when you ride your camel. But actually riding your camel is pretty difficult. It's like an Englishman on skis. We're not designed to ski. We're not designed to ride camels. And so we hopped on and off just to give our backs a rest sometimes. For me, the most magical part of every day was sunset, because you know that the greatest enemy, which is the sun, has disappeared for another day, and those beautiful stars will come out. But the temperature plummets like a stone from 28 down to 0 within 9 or 10 hours. And you gather as much brush as you can, get the fire going. Just beautiful, a beautiful time of the day, but also very busy. Have to write your diary. We did a daily blog. We checked the photograph of the day. We had a satellite connection, which we didn't want to use very often. We didn't want to be staring at screens, so we just limited. That was 30 minutes a day. Just connect everything, send out the image to update the website so people could follow us, and then on we went. Our camels are doing really well, pretty hungry. So times when there was nothing to graze on, not even a single strand of grass, so we'd have to dip into our emergency rations for them, which they devour pretty quickly. We got hit by 3 sandstorms in 49 days, and you can see the tension in this photograph here. The ropes, the camels are very jittery, the sand is flying everywhere. We didn't have tents at all. We didn't want to sit in the vehicles or sleep in the vehicles, so the only solution was to roll up in a blanket and just wait for the sandstorm to stop. But if you do that and let your camels wander, you'll never find them. A, the prints will be covered, but B, they will be gone several miles and you'll never find them again. So you have to tie those 2 front legs together pretty tightly, just a gap of about 6 inches so that they can shuffle along a little bit. And if they want to move, they're not able to move very far. But sticking your head down between those 2 front legs when the camels are as tense and as nervous as this is not to be done lightly. So you really do have to work as a team to hobble your camels. We undertook several scientific projects on the journey, one of which was to do with extreme environment psychology. So we're working with a team at Manchester University, and how do human beings cope with adversity and difficult situations? So it's not long before we send a manned space journey to Mars. You know, how is that individual going to cope with extended periods of isolation and the negative highs and lows? So we were partnering with a team at Manchester looking into extreme environment psychology. And it just made me think back to this photograph I showed you at the start, because if I were to ask you to write down 3 words that capture this image, and in particular the human emotions that you see on those faces, for me, exhaustion, negativity, defeat, maybe, I don't know. These are the guys at the South Pole having discovered Nansen's flag fluttering away. And of course, we all know that Scott and his men died painfully close to a depot of food that would have saved their lives. But all the time they were walking, they were dragging with them a story of heroic failure. But I wonder, had it been heroic success, had that Norwegian flag not been flying at the South Pole, and Scott and his men had a story of great positivity to share, how that would have influenced the speed and the extra energy, the extra spring that would have been in their step every day, and whether they would have made it to that depot food. Of course, we'll never know, but expedition psychology is a really interesting field. And for us psychologically now, every step was a downward step. We're approaching journey's end. We are now approaching sea level. Every day we're losing height. The GPS would tell us so, but it was almost, hard to discern really. But as we lose height and get closer to the sea, we have a new challenge, which is thick fog. Every morning we'd wake at 4 o'clock. Every star would be out. 1 more hour in your sleeping bag before you have to move. And then when you do wake up, every star has disappeared because the temperatures dropped to that point that what moisture there is has condensed and you're now in a thick fog. So the camels look like they've just come out of the hairdressers, completely bedraggled with moisture. And actually, for all of its navigational challenges, navigation was pretty easy really still, because you could use a handheld compass to hold a northerly direction. It was great because the sun wasn't able to burn through this fog until midday sometimes, by when we'd done the vast majority of our kilometers. And then the next challenge was quicksand, or subka, white crystalline feature here. When it's white, it's great because it's hardened, but the black line on the far horizon is lethal. And that's when it's rained recently, which it had here. And if your camels slip on this stuff, you will never get them back up again. And these camels are royal camels, and we have to give them back. Each one of these camels is worth about £15,000. And if it slips on the sand, you will never get it back up. And the vehicles dare not travel on this. They have to take a very long arc around to meet us on the other side. So this is where armor in front, the benefits of traveling as a team are that you can always send someone else first in times of great danger. So this is me now taking my seat firmly at the back and letting the other 2 go first in the hope that they will find the right route. And we're now at the border between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. You can see under the camels a bit of a mess appearing. Camels get pretty stressed in this environment. So it's the only time in my life that I've been through the fast track channel anywhere. So what would normally take you several hours to cross, we were through and into Qatar within minutes. And Major Talal was able to report mission accomplished back to his headquarters in Riyadh. And waiting for us in Saudi Arabia were fresh camels from the Emir of Qatar, and it was like getting out of a battered old Ford Capri and getting into a Rolls Royce. And Qatari camels were incredibly comfortable. They were incredibly well behaved, and they responded to your commands. So we realized what a ragtag bunch we've been riding for the last 40 days, but they've done a brilliant job. So now Qatar is within days, and journey's end is just a few days away, and this building was built, this torch was built for the Asian Games in Doha several years ago. So our last night, like that of Thomas, ironically, 85 years before, was spent shivering under a bush on the outskirts of Doha. And ironically, also, it rained. It rained for us, and rain is very rare in the desert. So it rained for Thomas. He was hiding under a table with all of his scientific instruments. And for us, we hid under a bush. And by now, I don't know where all these people came from. We had a group of about 20 camels with people from Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia, Saudi, Qatar, Oman. We had a real little mini United Nations. But this winter, Prince Charles was patron of 2 expeditions, our own, and to the south in the southern summer. But exactly at this time, a young man called Henry Worsley was pulling his sled to try and cross Antarctica in the footsteps of Shackleton. And news reached us this night that Henry had passed away with a severe illness on his attempt to cross Antarctica. So that news reached us on the satellite phone, and I was trying to explain to my Bedouin colleagues that there was somewhere on Earth colder than Doha on a January morning, but they would not believe me, because it was about 5 degrees here and bitterly cold. For us desert dwellers, it's bitterly cold. For them to try and understand that there's somewhere on Earth where it was minus 55 degrees, it was just impossible for them to understand. So anyway, our last day through the back streets of Doha with our very well-behaved camels, and this young boy who's about 6 years old riding a camel beautifully through the streets. And this is modern day Doha, very different to the Doha that greeted Thomas in 1931. Even the Qataris call it the Mushroom City, because when they come to work every morning, another building sprung up overnight. They seem to build things so quickly here. And this was us standing outside the gates of the very fort where Thomas stood in 1931. Each of us had lost about 7 kg in weight, which very quickly came back, sadly. And waiting to greet us, this was the Emir of Qatar in 1931 when he greeted Thomas, and waiting to greet us was Sheikh Johan bin Hamad, second in line to the throne, a very nice man, and a wonderful reception. Inside this beautiful fort, you can see in the middle Sheikh Johan there, the British ambassador. The British ambassador by this stage has realized that these folks haven't really had a proper wash in 49 days. So he was stretching away to keep away from the smell as much as he was to talk to Sheikh Johan, I think. So a wonderful day of music. And for us, that was our journey's end. But for Thomas, how did you communicate something in 1931? No social media then, and so for him, he had to jump on an Arabic sailing boat called a dhow, sail further north to a place called Bahrain, and in Bahrain, Cable and Wireless had a telegraph station where he was able to send a cable saying that the greatest desert on Earth, the largest desert on Earth, had been successfully crossed, and that was when the news broke around the world. When I was rootling around the box in Cambridge, I found this. This was a telegram sent by King George, Prince Charles's great-grandfather, of congratulations. And also in that box, a very painful telegram sent by Philby. Remember, Philby was the man in Riad who had his own heart set on being the first to cross. And you'll see at the date at the bottom, this was sent over a month after Thomas's news broke, and reputedly on hearing the news of Thomas's success, Philby locked himself in a room for a week and refused to come out. He was so devastated, muttering obscenities, and eventually came out and got over it and went on to do his own fantastic journeys further north in Arabia. And Prince Charles came out to visit Oman, and we were lucky to have about 45 minutes with him. And the slightly quizzical look on his face is because I'm trying to explain to him what we've got for him, because we thought we would present him with a beautiful photograph of the empty quarter, but we were told by his private secretary that he has so many paintings and so many photographs. They're hidden on top of wardrobes, under wardrobes, behind sofas. Get him something different. And so what we got him was a pair of socks, and these socks are special socks because that's what we wore, socks on our feet across the desert. We didn't wear boots, and these socks are knitted by the Bedouin people, and they know how to make socks. So the bottom of the socks are double weave to give you extra protection against the cold sand in the morning and the hot sand at midday. But the rest of the sock is very loose weave, and that means when you pick up your foot off the sand, all the sand drains out, and you don't get a big ball of sand in your sock. And they're also very hairy and bristly, which means when you're sitting around the fire at night that the scorpions don't snuggle up next to your feet. So that's the marketing pitch done. If any of you would like to buy a pair of those socks, Armour's wife will knit you a pair. So if any of you do pub quizzes, I now know that the size, the royal feet are a size 9, And so I found someone with size 9 feet. I drew around their foot, and I went out to the desert. I found Amar's wife, and so the socks that Amar has with him have been knitted by his wife out of goat wool and sheep's wool, and we're about to present them to Prince Charles. What I forgot to say to Amar was really how important a man Prince Charles was, and it actually might have been nice to put it in some kind of decorative box rather than a plastic bag from the local supermarket. But Prince Charles saw the funny side when we held up the socks to show him. Quite a bit of sand did drain out onto the very expensive carpets, and he did assure us that he would be wearing them at Royal Ascot that year. I wasn't sure whether he did, but maybe inside his Wellington boots he did. So for us, lecture at the Royal Geographical Society, like Thomas, that beautiful lecture theatre, full to the brim, 750 people. Listen to the story that you're hearing right now. Thomas, as you saw from the headstone on the grave, died a young man. His health declined pretty quickly after his journey, really, and his lecture tours. He spent a lot of his latter years in Morocco, where the climate was a bit kinder to him. But he eventually died in the house that he was born in Pil. And there's a little plaque outside the local history society. You put a little plaque by the door. But when we went around those streets with BBC Southwest interviewing people, no one had ever heard of this very famous man who did these extraordinary things. And Sheikh Saleh, the man that he traveled with, didn't have any medal pinned on his chest, and yet he outlived, despite not having any access to anything other than traditional medicine. He outlived Bertram Thomas. Sadly, Sheikh Saleh passed away in Dubai. He did eventually fall ill in his 60s, and he went to UAE to get treatment, and he passed away. He passed away there. So the final thing, now we're into the last minutes of this presentation. The final thing is, people ask me the same question that they asked Thesiger and Thomas. What was the highlight of your journey across the Great Desert? And yes, the landscape is spectacularly beautiful, but it's really the people that make the landscape, and people that make the journey so special. So I'm just going to share the last video clip with you. We did have a TV documentary crew with us. They had a drone, and they produced a really nice little documentary at the end. So I hope you enjoy this. I'm not sure whether I connected with the sound, whether you're able to hear it or not, but if you're not able to hear it, at least you'll be able to see it.
هؤلاء المكتشفين المنسيين الشيخ صالح بن كلوت وبترمان توماس.
Just now the expedition started. I'm really happy, glad.
رحلة طيبة إن شاء الله. طيب.
One of the main highlights has been our interaction with the local people. In every community there have been social gatherings, which is part of the reason why we're doing this journey, is to reconnect people to their heritage. If we can't go to them, they come to us. I've never known anything like today. The poetry, the singing, and the food was just wonderful. Thank you so very much. One thing that has not changed is the hospitality.
We met over 1,000 people in 14-15 days.
Hinds beans, as eaten by Bertram Thomas and Sheikh Saleh bin Khalid. Great. We were greeted with warm smiles and handshakes and lots of coffee, and here we are.
خنجر الشيخ صالح بن كلوت.
The highlight of the day, the enormity of the landscape. Yeah, look at that. What Thomas depended on for 57 days was local knowledge from start to finish. You can't beat that.
49 days.
This journey has demonstrated the resilience and the grit and the determination of the Arab people, and I
our messaging shown that side of the Arab world that people never see.
So the final slide is really just say a very big thank you to the very patient helwa, the camel, because one of the many people I spoke to before this journey was Benedict Allen, the traveller and writer. And Benedict had done his own journey with camels across the skeleton coast of Namibia. And his last words to me as I waddled out of his flat after several gin and tonics was, never trust your camel completely. Don't ever think that you've struck up a relationship with that animal, because they are so unpredictable. And I like to think that Helwa and I did get on rather well towards the end. I would snuffle a few little handfuls of dates in the darkness every morning, which I wasn't supposed to do, but we did get on really well, and we couldn't have done it without our camels. So that's it. That's the journey over, and thank you very much for listening.
Wow, thank you very, very much, Mark. I wonder if you can stop your screen share, and then we can see everybody. That is truly, truly inspirational. I don't think you realise, and I don't think I realised till I was watching that, Mark, how in these COVID winter times, we are, a lot of us, feeling we can't travel, we're quite isolated, we're not seeing people. Tonight, you've given me that old feeling of travel, that great feeling that the world out there is a fantastic place and we need to go and explore it. And our COVID times will come to an end, but you've really lifted, I think, people's souls tonight, and been truly, truly inspirational. Thank you so, so much. One of the questions I've been asked so far is, our media person, Mike, was saying that could we have a link to that video, because the sound wasn't showing.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Mike. Yeah.
No, that's fine.
It should have been embedded in what I sent you earlier today.
Okay.
So it should be in there. But otherwise, I'll send you a link. I think it is somewhere. I'll dig it out for you.
Great, that would be great, and then we can use it. But no, thank you very much indeed. That was brilliant.
Judy, just commenting on something you've just said there, because it did one thing that I did notice when I was looking at everyone sitting around eating together, just how we just can't do that anymore. But my next expedition took place in 1917, 1918, and ironically, it was the height of the last global pandemic, which was the Spanish flu. So, you know, we will get through this. Spanish flu killed far more people and came and went, and COVID will also come and go. So just not too much longer now, I think.
Oh, absolutely. No. But it's just lifted everybody in these dark winters. So thank you very much. One question actually from my daughter, who would like to do expedition medicine, if you didn't know. She'd like to know more information about your 2020 expedition. And also, sadly, one of our group members who's left this, Sharif Mohammed, he came on one of our training events and then ended up doing the 3 Peaks in the Yorkshire. Then he did the Wainwrights. Then he started going to Morocco and the Alps and ended up doing Everest Base Camp. And I'm really sad that Sharif is not here at the end, because I knew that your talk would be inspirational. So for anybody who felt like they would like to get involved in expeditions, what would you suggest the thing is that they need to do?
Well, I would say you can do whatever you want. The only thing that limits you is your imagination. And you know, my inspiration is Ran Fiennes, and it was when I was at university when he did his Transglobe expedition. So Ran went around the Greenwich Meridian. It took him about 3 or 4 years of planning, didn't spend 1 penny of his own money, managed to fundraise everything, crossed Antarctica, crossed the Arctic Ocean, and joined up all the bits in between. So that inspired me. But like anything, you know, you don't just go out there and climb Everest, you build up to things. And you know, before you go to Everest, you might do Mont Blanc, you might do Kilimanjaro, then you do some more technical peaks, and you build up and build up. And you know, we have a saying at Outward Bound, you know, when you tackle a big challenge, it's like eating elephants. You don't try and swallow it all in one go, you chop it up into small bits. And that's my you know, anything is possible. And you know, you can persuade anyone to give you a bit of support and open a door for you if you speak with enough passion, but do your homework, spend your months and years doing your research, come up with a compelling story, and get out there and sell it to someone. And you know, I'm just a humble lad who grew up in Shropshire. I was the first from my family to go to university, and it's just a love for what I do that enables me to do what I do. And so if it's possible for me, it's possible for anybody. And the first part of your question, Judy, my next expedition, that's kind of under wraps at the moment because of various patronages that are being discussed. And so I think the plan is that in September 2021 we will be announcing we'll have the big launch of that one somewhere in London, I think.
We'll be looking out for that, so thank you very much. I'm struggling to see the chat, so if anybody has a question, do you want to just put your hand up or just shout out, take yourself off mute and just shout out if there are any specific questions. One comment I did read was one of the best talks I've ever heard, so thank you, Mark, thank you very much. And I think the word that came across for me is love, a love of place, a love of your animal. You know, and I loved the picture of how you had to toughen up your camels by dragging them behind a pickup truck. So I think your passion, your inspirational shows through.
Well, Judy, one of the chats that I saw was that one of your listeners asked, how did Helwa get home? And of course we flew home from Doha, but that wasn't really possible for the camels. But what happens in Arabia is in the winter, camel racing is a big sport, and there are 3-ton trucks going up and down from every city to every city, carrying really fine thoroughbred, not our camels, I hasten to add, but very fine thoroughbred racing camels get transported all over Arabia in the winter months. So we just happened to ask around, and we found a truck going back to Oman, and our camels were rather ungracefully, they're carried up on a crane and they're plonked into the back of a truck. And within a day, they were back where they'd started their journey, slightly bewildered, no doubt, thinking they'd probably had a dreadful nightmare. But that was how Helwa got home. She got home in the back of a 3-ton truck.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thank you once again. And I hope you have a good evening, because it's late for you. 10 o'clock at night, are we?
It's 10:21, yeah.
10:21, so it's quite late at night for you. Just before I lose everybody, just to say that our next talk, PAD Online, we're calling them, is on the 4th of February. That's a week on Thursday, when we have Dr. Riad Elsus. So Riad was a lecturer at the University of Damascus. He fled from the civil war in Syria. He's now based in Yorkshire, but he was a beekeeper and he taught beekeeping. And he's going to be talking about his journey, his life, his beekeeping. And we're also going to have our own Catherine Mercer, who is also going to be talking about her bee project. So that's the 4th of February, another thing to look forward to, and we look forward to having as many of you there. But on behalf of everybody here, Mark, thank you for spending the time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for inspiring us, and thank you for putting a smile definitely on my face and a lot of other people's face. Your story was inspirational. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.